Welcome everybody to our spring term series of seminars organized by the Venice Center for Digital and Public Humanities at the Department of Humanities at Foscari University. It still sounds a bit too optimistic, but as a matter of fact, since the 1st of February, it's officially springtime, at least in Ireland, beginning on the feast of the ancient goddess and Christian saint, Saint Bridget. I don't know, is Mary here? She would be able to confirm. So my name is Franz Fischer. I'm the director of the Venice Center for Digital and Public Humanities. And I especially welcome our guest speaker today, Ernesto Priego. Thank you for coming. And I will introduce you to Ernesto briefly in a minute. Welcome to our master students and everyone who joined us today from around the globe. We have almost 50 participants. Thank you for coming. This series is organized by my colleagues Stefano Dallaglio and Deborah Paci. In the background, technical and communication support is given by Elisa Corot. Paolo Monella will tweet like hell, like he used to do. And comments and questions during and after the talk are welcome in the chat. So leave a note if you want to comment on something or have questions. This is being recorded, so be aware of this. And the recording will be published on our YouTube channel in due course. And the slides, if Ernesto is sharing his slides, can be published also on our GitHub repository. Stefano, do you or Deborah say something about the series in general? Otherwise, we proceed.
I don't think so. I mean,
okay. Everyone is informed. The information you find on the website and all the channels, so we will inform also in advance for every other seminar. So let me briefly introduce you to Ernesto Priego. He's a lecturer in the Department of Computer Science of City, University of London. As a researcher, he is affiliated to the Center for Human-Computer Interaction Design at City and to the UCL Center for Digital Humanities. He holds a PhD in Library and Information Studies and has a background in Cultural Studies and English Literature. Ernesto is the editor-in-chief and co-founder of the Comics Grid Journal of Comics Scholarship, a peer-reviewed open access journal published by the Open Library of Humanities. And this is what he will be talking about to us right now. And it would not be Ernesto Priego if he did not critically assess the political, social, and environmental dimension of his and our scholarly practices, which always happen to take place in cultures of hierarchy, privilege, and prestige. This much did you already announce on Twitter earlier today.
Right, yes.
And a lesson you have learned from 10 years of grassroots open access and digital scholarly activism. If you don't tell your story, no one will. So Ernesto, very welcome, and we look forward to your talk right now.
Thank you so much, Franz, and thank you for the welcome, very kind, warm welcome by everyone in Venice. Thank you so much. And thank you for noticing that thread of tweets with which I basically, in a way, I was following a practice that I have, like many others today. We've been engaging in for a while, in which our academic practice basically is spread out, right? And sometimes in this case, for instance, we have this opportunity to talk, and but I basically it's very nice to see that the audiences are, and in this case, targeted audiences, the actual audience of the talk today, and the host, for example, looks at those outputs as well and is able to connect them, and that's the plan. So yes, I mean, it is, I guess this is a personal story, I must say, about a collective project. So in a way, I must say that I do this humbly, honestly. Like I am very honored by the invitation, and always consider is a true privilege to be able to talk to colleagues, and the generosity of your time now, that especially in the current context. I think we are going through one of the most difficult periods of history in that we have been able to experience directly as such. And perhaps for those of us who have lived in parts of the world where there was a general stability, the pandemic has shaken things up a little bit, I think. And in that context, I'm also extra grateful for your time and for your generosity being here in another Zoom. I appreciate the load the cognitive load is significant, and also the load on our physicality. So I was telling that this story is a personal story that is about a collective project, and therefore it's not just my story, but I am telling it from a particular positioning. So I'm going to try to, as time allows, to tell a story more or less with words and images, but mostly with images on the slides. It's a bit of a show and tell, like when we were in elementary school and we were asked to bring an image or a toy and tell the story about it. So I feel a little bit like that, and the comics grid has been my project I've been really invested in, but at the same time it has been a side project because it does not necessarily constitute my main job, right? My main day job. So this is part of the show and tell. So because the original title of the presentation of the seminar that I was invited to give today had the title of Insights from a Decade of the Comics Grid. Well, I'm starting a little bit farther away in May 2009. Those of you who have been in London may recognize those buildings close to the British Museum, where a comic book shop called Gosh used to be. It has moved to Soho now. It must be going through difficult times now through the pandemic because it is closed. But this was a signing that took place while I was a PhD student at UCLDH, at the Center for Digital Humanities at the University College London. And I was writing my PhD about comics and digital technology, and how I thought I was investigating how digital technologies were transforming the way we understood comics. And it was I've also been somehow invested in the whole bookish culture of comics and the fan cultures around comic books. And this was the launch of this particular volume by Alan Moore and Kevin O'Neill. And it took us about 5 hours to queue to get to be in front of these authors for literally the time it took them to sign. And I just mumbled something. It was the first time I was in front of them in person. And it was people, the public would pass by and look at us like aliens, like, what are those people doing? There were people with tape recorders, with tape recorders, MP3 players or whatever, mobile phones, playing music. And it was like a festival. It was like queuing to go into, waiting for Glastonbury to open the doors or the gates or something. So this was a completely collective public experience. And this really fits nicely, with my idea of comic books as products of popular culture, and popular culture understood as a culture by the people and for the people, for the folk out there. And that, comic books also have a history of having been, and, they continue to be misunderstood up to a certain extent. You will still see news items that start with boom, pow, cow, and every time you mention comics, there will be onomatopoeias involved, or comics are not for children anymore, etc. So there's still a bit of a misunderstanding of the true complexity of comic books, but they are not. Comic books have traditionally been thought of as well as, they were in fact, popular literature that was read by those, especially in some countries that could not read anything else. Where I'm from, in Mexico, there's a very strong tradition of having understood comic books as the the way towards literacy. Comic books were an introduction to proper reading, right? Now we know it's a bit more complex than that. And given that the topic of this seminar series is about the public humanities and the digital humanities, I like this the reflections posted by Robin Schroeder in 2017 for the first Day of Public Humanities, that also fits nicely within the Day of Digital Humanities series that has also been taking place, I think, since 2010 or 2011 or so. And so I do understand the work that we do in comic studies, or the academic study of comics, by its very nature as public humanities, because we are dealing with a form of an artistic or cultural manifestation which has never been only academic or only scholarly. People who enjoy comics are also scholars in their own right, and many of our most important thinkers about comics have not necessarily been academics, with an affiliation in a university. Robin Schroeder goes on to say, he refers to the difficulties of faculty in the public humanities, digital humanities, and public history with traditional publishing models. He speaks the uneasy fit of these disciplines into the conventional academic modes of inquiry on which these fields have in the word public and implicit critique. And this fits nicely with what, the way Franz kindly introduced me, because the big motivation for the comics grid was the frustration we felt in literally a cognitive dissonance some of us experienced between comics as a form and the channels that academia was presenting to us, to be able to even start thinking about working on them. Robin Schroeder goes on to say, as professionals increasingly move into and out of the academy and back, and as the field as a whole within the university and without it is beset by casualizations, is underpaid, and is developing critical consciousness of all the above, spaces and modes of work seem to be the fault lines to watch. So I really like this idea about spaces and modes of work. And I guess that for us, with an interest in the digital humanities, will be acutely aware that there is an inherent fragility of the outputs that we are interested in creating and the ones that we study by their digital nature. And also that the spaces available to us to work on them, to create them and to study them are also, or appear to be many times closed to us or far away from us, or basically inaccessible. Continuing the intention of showing the connections between the public humanities and the digital humanities, and to mention a project that was also inspiring me as a student in UCL DH back in 2010 is the Culturomics project, and seeing how there is a shooting up of the term digital humanities, at least in the books that Google has digitized around 2005 or before, a little bit before, whereas public humanities seems to be going upward a little bit from 2010 or so. So I sort of like the idea to situate the project of the comics grid and other open access and digital projects that emerged in that particular year, that also coincides with the post economic depression and financial situations that were happening in 2008 to 2009, Occupy Wall Street, Anonymous, etc. In this, I'm not sure if, please tell me if you can see I can see the slides speak on my screen, so hopefully you can see what they say. But if you need a description, please do let me know and I will describe more. But again, this is a screenshot of a search that I did on the Books Engram Viewer from Google for comic studies, comic scholarship, and digital humanities, and something like that happens, that that comic studies, it is really from 2010 as a term that starts indicating some movement, at least in the books, again digitized by Google. It's interesting to see that in these two research results, digital humanities seems to have a downward trajectory from 2015 in terms of mentions in books. We could keep discussing that, but that's not the point of today's talk. But yeah, I mean, I would like to link then the concept of the digital humanities, the public humanities, with the notion of open access, that again, it could be the whole subject of seminars, and it is, or degrees, PhD dissertations and monographs, as it is. But that in a key definition for our purposes would be that it means no barriers to access or reuse, essentially through licensing. And quite inspiring for me was the discovery in the early, before I became a PhD student, of the Budapest Open Access Initiative. Also, this matched my education, my upbringing in Mexico. As a Mexican student, I did up to 2 masters in Mexico before coming to the UK to do another master's. And that the experience of the library, even in the I was very lucky, very privileged student with access to the National Autonomous University of Mexico, massive, important university. But still, our experience was that of only having access to scholarship through photocopies. And I was there. I'm old enough to have been there just when the first computer labs were introduced in the School of Humanities. I was one of the first users of the first desktop computers that were made available, with access to the web, at least, right? Of course, the university has had access to the web since way more before that, since the 70s, a pioneer in internet access in Mexico and Latin America. However, our experience was that of scarcity, was that of not having access to resources. So open access, to me, was like the natural thing also for someone with a background in making fanzines and cut and paste artworks and do-it-yourself chapbooks. I was really motivated by, my idea was that, it was a bit ridiculous that there would be so many hurdles to publish research and to make it available to others, that it would be so expensive. Something in common between comics and open access really in their history is that at least the history of comic books in the 20th century, at least, was widely or very much impacted by the history of copyright and the impact of restrictive copyrights and greedy organizations that took the copyrights from authors, is what both created the comic book publishing empires that, at least in the English-speaking world, we know, to the point that Disney now owns, both Marvel and Lucasfilm and everyone, and DC Comics is owned by Warner, and Warner must be owned by someone else, if not Amazon. But the whole thing is, that there is a connection between the history of comic books and their strive for recognition and the strive of academics, maybe, or authors who want to retain more control of the work that they produce, in terms of being free, at least, to decide how they want to distribute it. So CC BY license has been the license that allows more possibilities for this. Other key inspiration for the project was Kathleen Fitzpatrick, who around 2009 was using the Media Common Press platform for open scholarship in open formats. It's interesting that even today, now the comments are closed, but there were lots of zero comments. The technology was there to annotate, to provide open peer review in progress while the book was being written and published, openly available. It was. I think this was a totally pioneering project. The engagement was really not there yet. In my opinion, because the infrastructures externally were not there, the affordances for people to have the time to volunteer, the generosity, the non-competitive environments, etc. The book was later published in 1211 by NYU Press, and it shows the journey from the innovation implicit at the beginning of exploring with both form and content, and with accessibility at its center, and then formal publishing formats by recognized presses. So in a way to show that they are not opposed to each other. So this was very, very inspiring for me also, not just because of how it was presented, but because of the actual ideas discussed by Fitzpatrick there. So I'll try to speed up now, because we have a series of images of, a little bit of digital ethnography, digital archaeology. For this seminar, I went back to the first tweet that I posted announcing the very first public mention of the comics grid that was at the time called the International London Comics Grid on a commercial platform known as Meetup. So this is the result of me and my experience as an immigrant, and not really having many networks and feeling a bit isolated as a PhD student, working mostly on my own, shared an office with Isabel Galina, with others, but mostly I was on my own doing comic studies, and it was a way to reach out. So I basically, with the support of my wife, we paid a membership in Meetup to basically make a call for people to get together and discuss, where to go next in terms of comic studies. The next day, I made another call for people to join us. I was asking, please retweet, and as you can see that to date, there was only one retweet. So just like the 0 comments in Kathleen Fitzpatrick's book, there was also, the engagement was not massive. So the first group of people must have been like 5 people that joined in the Institute of Education in the bar there at near UCL in Bloomsbury. So it's all a bit very posh as well, just because we're privileged enough to be in London. Here's another example, is screenshots of projects in which I've been involved, like basically just volunteering content. This was a project by UCL called Tales of Things. They wanted people to digitize objects, and so they could be tagged and they could get a QR code. And it's very nice to see that even though I could not find the QR codes anymore, I could find the items and that were there. So these were also these are key components in the history of the comics grid. So one was the Meetup project, then there was the summer 2010 conferences. This was when the the UCL Center for Digital Humanities was launched internally before the public thing was done. So that's my badge. Then DH 2010 that happened at King's College, that's my badge, and the USB. That USB is going to look ancient and completely obsolete, probably already does, no? It looks. So that conference was key as well to meet other people, meet people in the digital humanities, get inspired by different projects that were happening. And then the comics conference in Copenhagen in 2010, in which I got to hang out with the colleagues with whom we founded the comics grid. This was, again, it's paradigmatic in terms of the relationship between comic studies and public humanities, because Comics DK was essentially a comic convention for fans, people signing stuff and buying toys and posters and prints and books and listening to artists and getting signatures. But it was associated with an academic side of things that was obviously less popular. So that's where we got to hang out, Roberto Bartual, Esther, Claudio, Grace Schneider, Tony Benetti, and myself. So there was that conference, there was the Manchester Comics Conference, there was the Leeds Comic Forum, and it was in those conferences really that year that the whole concept of a blog, that would be an academic blog, basically we were like, we need faster scholarship and we need to be able to disseminate it online. We need to be able to share stuff without restrictions, and there were very few, if any, options available. And what we wanted to do as well was rapid publication. So during 2011 and 2012, we published, lots of content. I wish I had the time to fish the stats. We do have them. This resource has been archived by the UK Web Archive. Unfortunately, the live resource does not longer exist because we had to do some migration so we could become a proper journal with the version of record infrastructures. So that's a screenshot of the first archive in January 2011, January 31, 2011. Our first article, which was a short post on peanuts by Bartual, was published. So this is why we're talking about 10 years now. This is another example of, we made these stickers with the QR codes. They were posted in toilets, in bars, in telephone booths. You will probably be familiar with street art and how the art of the sticker, of a nonsensical sticker is out there, is a way of a form of public art. So we were, doing some kind of, guerrilla scholarship by posting stickers with a QR code that was actually volunteered by a company called OpticSnap that I don't think if they exist anymore, but they really liked the project online and they offered to design that QR code for us, and then we made the stickers. It's interesting that here we are online on Zoom during second year of the COVID pandemic, and now for everyone, everybody is fed up with Zoom, and it's causing lots of dilemmas in terms of homeschooling and accessibility of materials. But one of our first articles by Kathleen Fitzpatrick, she's an editor in the Comics Grid, was about a comics classroom without walls and promoting online learning. We announced the journal on the 31st of January 2011, 1:53 p.m. That's the first tweet that we made with #comics, very general, going for people that would be looking for stuff on comics on Twitter. And as you can see, and you will see, even then, that early, and we were just very excited that on our first day live, in a few hours, we had 187 visits to our first blog post. So we were already quantifying what we were doing, but not for quantification's sake, but because we really were keen to see whether what we were doing was being received by anyone out there. I mentioned Kathleen Fitzpatrick's book. There's others, Lawrence Lessig's books on free culture and copyright in the digital era. Many other colleagues, the work that Martin Eve was doing at the time as well. In terms of comics, Graphixia started by David Wright and Peter Wilkins. Peter Wilkins is now an editor in the Comics Grid as well, and they started this project, which is a blog on a conversation about comics. It's a collective blog on comic studies, so we were not the only ones working on that space. The Comics Forum that started as a conference in 2009, and then it became a website, where there are contributions from a lot of people in the field of comic studies, and it continues very active. So that was, let's say, the milieu. Here, another example in 2011 of us trying to quantify the stats for our WordPress resource. Everybody, then we started with suffering a bit, as we were getting PhDs, because none of us that started the journal had PhDs. So a lot of the concerns were like, no one is going to publish with you if there's no citations, if it's not recognized, etc. So we had a go at learning how to publish our own collected edition. We made it in ebook format, in EPUB format. We involved colleagues that are not necessarily academics. Brad Brooks, for example, who was crucial in helping us design in different formats, in PDF for the web, in PDF for printing, in EPUB for tablets, etc. And what we did there was to collect all the articles, all the research articles published during our first year, and it can be downloaded as a single output. So in a way, we were also doing our own digital preservation, and I'm very glad we did it, because that original blog is no longer available, just available through the UK Web Archive in a mirror site. We got a contract with Ubiquity Press, researcher-led open access publisher based in London, and we migrated the content of our second year. No, our third year. So that's where we started really the first volume in 2013. This is what it looked like. We have a lot of things that we did not have affordances that we did not have with the blog, that we could not have in the blog, which was basically research integrity, anti-plagiarism checking, a management system for peer review, editorial guidance, provision for open peer review, a membership to the publishing committee of publishing ethics, links with universities, that should be a plural, I apologize, ethics committee, provisions for open research data, DOIs, indexing, metrics, So now the journalism Scopus is on, Web of Science, the directory of open access journals. And now it sounds easy, but, we had to think of ways of formatting all that so that, the journal met the right infrastructures too, so that authors contributing to the journal actually got the recognition that they are expected, that they expect from their employers or from research councils. I will remind you again that we started this project in 2011, really, but the RC UK, now UKRI, that's the Research Councils UK, did not start its open access policy in the UK until April 2013. So at the time that we were talking about open access, there was, not a lot of information about it, and there was a little bit of reticence about the idea. People were worried about their copyrights. They were worried about open licensing. In other fields, that was happening too. In history, for example, there was great opposition to the idea of open licensing. We also, the idea started with the concept of the comics grid, so the idea was that of a network. This event was really influential for the journal, really, in which we had a go at co-organizing a small conference that was completely volunteered. So we were also exploring in how to, again, I don't know if deconstruct, but investigate alternative ways to the traditional hierarchical, very structured ways in which we do academic conferences. And combining the conferences with the hashtags and monitoring that, and just like trying to see that, okay, yes, it's true, there are filter bubbles, and it's true that it may be true that we're always talking to each other, perhaps, but the reality is that this is a project that emerged because we started speaking out and reaching out for fellow-minded people, and that at least there was a signal, and that if we had done it behind closed doors at a time in which there was no Zoom, and it was not the remote participation was not the way of doing things. I had an MLA blog called Remote Participation, by the way, in 2014, calling for more remote participation to conferences. So it all fits that work. Now that this is the present, 2016 to now, from Open Ubiquity Press is a researcher-led open access publisher that, however, required article processing fees. We waived them for all the authors that published with us during that period. Those fees were waived. That showed that comic studies people, really, as comic scholars, did not have or could not secure at the time funds to publish open access. So all those fees were waived, which means that we were not making any money for a publisher that really needed the money to operate. They were accessible APCs, I think they were £200 or something at the time, but they were unaffordable, or our authors claimed they were unaffordable. Moving to the Open Library of Humanities allowed us to remove APCs altogether. We are funded by them. We are very grateful for their work. It's what allows the journal to exist, and the Open Library of Humanities is a project that is funded through different major funders and a network of international libraries. So libraries do pay a subscription, even if the content is available to anyone. You don't have to be a member of that university or of that institution. So that's it's not like we are publishing, this is not like a big data, massive, we're not a big journal in any way, in the sense of us publishing lots of content. This illustrates the number of articles we have published since 2012, in which we moved to Ubiquity Press. 2017 and 2018. We were quite keen as well to be more generous in terms of what content we were accepting in order to create more traction. And then as we got more and more submissions, then it naturally followed that the criteria had to be a bit tightened in terms of peer review. We have continued to monitor our tweetage. We have, as you saw, a Twitter account dedicated to the journal. That's a visualization of the retweets from our account. So it would be about 1,400 accounts that would be, in that network. We haven't spotted, apart from ours, because I did code a little bot that tweets every few hours an article from the archive, just to ensure that the content keeps moving, and we have seen that has helped people discover content that otherwise they would have missed. So it's quite hard work. According to Twitter analytics, like, an impression is, when the algorithm infers that a post has been viewed or that has appeared on someone's timeline. But there would maybe for example, for an article or a tweet, 1,400 impressions, and for that there will be 12 clicks. So or likes or retweets. So the engagement is what actually counts, where there's something happening. But the engagement can be also just a like or a retweet, and it may not necessarily lead to people actually visiting your journal. But the reason why we do it is not necessarily to attract people to the content of the article, but to create a community around it, to create awareness, and to keep spreading the word and finding colleagues that would be interested in contributing and participating in different ways. Google Analytics is another source of information from us, provided by one of our publishers, so the producers in this case, because the Open Library of Humanities continues to work until now with Ubiquity Press in the case of our journal. And this is the latest data from the report from 2020. So it means that there's been about 46,000 users of the site in the last year. We've seen, that always the issue with these metrics is, what's the benchmark? How do you compare it? So there are ways of comparing this. Just the editor of Glossa, the linguistics journal, published today a tweet about similar data that must have been provided to the editor, like it was provided to us. And considering that linguistics is a much larger field than comic studies, and the users are around 80,000, we can find ways of comparing this data, but finding journals that would be published by the same publisher, that have the same dissemination model, and maybe that they more or less are within the same field or subset of fields, and try to get a better idea whether that means anything or not, if that's good or not. We can start comparing indicators. So we have a top 10 for the most viewed pages in the journal. So obviously most page views are on the when they land at home, but then we have the actual articles. So it's nice to see that the actual articles are being clicked on, and we've seen outlier cases like the David Bowie article that for some reason it went berserk, and we can see correlations there with how many times it was tweeted and how aggressive the author was promoting it, for example, and also the topic of David Bowie and that it is David Bowie. So there's some themes like Marvel Comics or manga. The term manga tends to attract lots of readers. So we can get insights like that. That doesn't mean that we will be becoming a manga studies journal only. Altmetric, using the Altmetric Explorer for us in terms of our interest in the public is key, because it gives us a wider array of indicators that are not just citations. Really, you will see that I am not really talking about citations here, because I think they are mainly of academic interest. So Altmetric tracks, other social media accounts, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Wikipedia mentions. and other sources. And, you know, our top 5 articles are not necessarily the same as the most viewed ones. So there is not necessarily also a correlation between the articles that have been most mentioned on Twitter and the ones that actually get more visited or more, you know, read or viewed or downloaded. But what is interesting is that you know, we can get an idea, you know, get some indications of the sources of attention, that it's not only on Twitter, it's also on blogs. And when we get granular about it, we may see, you know, when it's only Ernesto and his team that has been doing it, and when it's actually, you know, someone, a member of the public or colleagues. What's interesting is that we can compare with other journals, and so a first insight is that Altmetric as a service can only track mentions of articles that are published with a digital object identifier, with a DOI, or another persistent identifier, like a PubMed identifier, for example. So not all humanities or comic studies, specifically comic studies journals, do have those. Altmetric at the moment only tracks 4 comic studies articles, the other one being image text, but for some reason there is no data coming back from image text. And it is just interesting to see, you know, the names of mentioned outputs and the mentions that we get. So, you know, the Journal of Graphic Novels and Comics is a more established journal that has more time in the sector. Therefore, they have published more articles, and they have obviously, they've been mentioned by the publisher, the authors, or readers online. The same goes for, you know, so the order would be like that. The Journal of Graphic Novels and Comic Studies and Comics has more articles than Studies in Comics that have been mentioned, not published, but that have been mentioned online. Now, if we look at the most mentioned in the 3 journals, I'm sorry, but the comics grid seems to be the one that has been most mentioned. Now, if we did the granularity, we have access, we will be able to determine, again, if that's just because our team is doing a very aggressive, you know, persistent job of tweeting and retweeting, or whether it, you know, this is an analysis that can be done, and you know, if we had time, would be very nice to do. So by no means I am saying that this is de facto that the outputs are better, or that the journal is better than the other ones. That's not what I'm saying here. It's just that this is the data that we get when we do these searches. So that's the vision, right? The vision is that we want outputs. The limitation with WordPress was that it was too guerrilla, it was too fragile. It didn't have the infrastructure. We wanted to be interoperable, we wanted to be sustainable. As you can see, the sustainability thing failed really, so we had to do, again, guerrilla digital archiving, and the UK Web Archive really saved us by taking those early snapshots, by taking us on, that it is measurable, as we have seen, but also that it is rapidly accessible and reusable. So instead of seeing the article as the finished article, it is really, our vision is that of a toolkit. So this is a slide that, curiously, I have used before. It's exactly as I showed it in a Sussex event in 2015. So it's been 5 years now, but these issues remain, that there's still strong resistance in some places to publishing in journals that are not published by Elsevier or you know, or Sage or Wiley, depending on the sector. Even when in the UK, at least, the Research Excellence Framework is explicit about the fact that the place of publication is not taken into account, it is a factor of esteem that is still being considered. There is a bias there that is cultural and is very difficult to get rid of. So the whole notion of content, not, you know, container, is still there. There is a bit of misunderstanding of the role of interrogation. People may feel intimidated, and they may feel aggressive, there is fear of change sometimes, so it has taken a while. We believe that comics as artworks, that products that have a wide readership deserve studies that are available by those readers. Sometimes authors whose work is being written about cannot access the outputs. People will argue, well, you can always write to the author and ask them to send you a copy by email, but it doesn't have to be like that. So it's very interesting that it took a pandemic for more conversation about the consequences of paywalls. It says in this piece from Friday, the 29th of January, this year in The Guardian, librarians at UK universities say students' reading lists for this term are being torn up because publishers' eye-watering increases to ebook prices. So even though this refers to ebooks and not necessarily journals, the same applies because the prices of subscriptions are insane and are also ruining university library budgets. So I think we have been working for a different way of doing things. I believe that the future is still open. The future is not now, but after 10 years, it does feel like we've come some way, because at least, the journal or the project is appearing in the same networks as others. It's being indexed by the databases where most scholars go. So it's a bit less antagonistic. It's a little bit less polarized, the landscape. There is more acceptance of social media for scholarly use. So there are plenty of reasons to be optimistic. I just hope that, I wish it didn't have to take a global pandemic with, hundreds of thousands of people dying for us to start thinking about how to make knowledge more publicly available. Thank you very much. I don't know if you have questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Ernesto. So this was a very insightful report on a long story, and you are really pioneer here. So thank you very much. We have now time for questions and discussion. So please use the chat to indicate if you have a question. You can also write your question in the chat, and I can give you also the right to speak then. Okay.
Something I found, oh yes, I think Paolo.
Yeah, Paolo, please go ahead.
Okay, well, I'd like to hear what Ernesto finds interesting, what you were just about to say. No, my question is this. I've been attending an open access seminar lately. It really, it opened my eyes, but my eyes were already a little bit opened about this. One of the issues you touched is evaluation and measurement of impact. So my question would be, it's very interesting that through the alt metrics, we measure a kind of impact that is not commonly measured by Scopus, which only measures how many times you're quoted, cited. But then there's another dimension of influence you have, which is not measurable, because it's how seminal you are, how important you are to people, how people like pretty much what you say, how much new discussion and new thought, and how innovative the thought that you sparkle is. I think this goes entirely beyond any numbers.
Absolutely.
But that's a complex issue. What do you make of this?
Yes, absolutely. And, always my concern when I show this data is that people may think that I am really excited about quantifying this. And to be honest, I am not, in the sense that I critique assuming an inherent value to higher numbers, or even centrality in a network, right? So these all of these metrics need to, there's a very strong movement towards what's called responsible metrics, right? The responsible use of metrics in assessment. and I think there must be transparency about, where the source, like, when I was making my presentation, I several times referred to, we really must look at whether this is just us tweeting about ourselves, right? For example, right? But the truth at the same time is that we cannot necessarily measure whether that repeated, that repetition of the broadcasting of, or the sharing of some material is having effects that we cannot quantify, and that, as you say, Paulo, we cannot really assess, but that they can only be felt in time. And I really like the reason why we also called it, Journal of Comic Scholarship, and rather than, I also like the term comic studies, but comic scholarship to me refers to this community of scholars, right? And talking about the project is just, for me, clear that we wouldn't be here at all without others, right? I just feel bad mentioning, say, Kathleen Fitzpatrick, because I didn't mention Claire Warwick, and I didn't mention, Melissa Terras or Roger Sabin, or, so many people. It's just the result of a network, right? That sometimes of things also we don't know. So, but in the context of public humanities, I think we need to be. I think the public humanities as a discipline, or as a disciplinary area, as a department in some universities, may have more potential than the term digital humanities to encompass the way that the digital sphere has transformed the way we interact with knowledge, or we produce it or we create it. The digital humanities, I think so far, this is controversial, but I think that digital humanities has sometimes failed at, for example, sustainability, right? Sustainability, or a more, like, I don't know, I don't know what I'm saying. I think that the public is online, right? And as such, only, I mean, not all the public, right? Obviously, right? So at the same time, I am, the work that I've been doing and learning from my colleagues, Domenico Fiormonte, for example, is about all the dark side of all the, platformization of knowledge, etc. So we must also take that into account on the other hand, right? But considering that we are here online, that that a lot of people, members of the public, are online. The publics are online, and there cannot be public humanities if they are not digital. In some way, in not everywhere, but in some way. It doesn't have to be that all outputs are digital, or that all but that in some way there must be a way to. So, I'm sure you have seen this happening, like when you are invited to an event and they send you a PDF and the link is not a hyperlink. I mean, it's just text, but the PDF is an image. Basically, you cannot click on the text. And then it's like, well, give me a link so I can share it, right? Or give, how do I access this event? Make it easier for me to go to your event, or make it easier for me to read your book. I think it's a question of reducing friction rather than of augmenting impact. As usual, I went in very different directions, but I hope that sort of begins to address your question, Paul.
There's a question by Linda Berube. If you want to ask your questions, please activate your microphone, otherwise I can read it.
Hi, Ernesto. Ernesto, I have a disclosure because Ernesto is my supervisor at City University. So I'm not trying to throw in softball questions here. I wanted to make it difficult to show he's not being favored or anything. The thing that struck me, and this is all very interesting, Ernesto, I hadn't realized the background for Comics Grid, but the thing that really kind of struck me is that, in other disciplines, they speak about a journal of record, the journal where everybody, wants to be published because that will really look good for them career-wise and whatever. I mean, how do you think this functions in comic study and comic studies? And was that another kind of barrier for Comics Grid in a sense that it kind of didn't have that cred in a way?
Yeah, I think so. I think, yes. I mean, I think it is an issue, and in a way, the motivation to stop doing things, what I call guerrilla style, by just blogging, was to get the recognition of being indexed and being able to have a PDF, for example, very easily. So you have HTML and you have a PDF. And then the moment you have a PDF, you can upload it to your repository. You have volumes and, page numbers and stuff. So the paradigm in all academia continues to be, up to a certain extent, that of the codex and, numbered pages. So when we had the blog, it was like, well, I had to copy the text and you could submit the manuscript, but then the repository librarian would be like, well, but this is not, we had an ISSN. That's the first thing we did, was getting a serial number that we still have, in order to try to, normalize things. Now, in terms of the esteem or the reputation, yes, I mean, we are competing, and, like the Public Library of Science knows, what they are competing with is with the, transactions and the beginning of the history of science. So we are talking about hundreds of articles of work, that reputation, generations of scholarship. So this is why I started with, also maybe referring to the importance of positioning and being humble about the contribution, because it's only over time, right? And hopefully, like the real objective of for me, this is not, maybe my editor or my fellow editors and peer reviewers may disagree, but I would like to see a more disaggregated, scholarly future in which, we call, like, the way I do it is, I use Mendeley or Zotero the way I use Spotify, or, drag and drop and make my own curation. And I have my own anthologies of scholarship, and references, bibliographies in articles are a selection of sources of articles or outputs from different sources, and your work as a scholar has been to put them together. And so rather than where it was published, I think that reports of the centrality or the good reputations of some journals has been highly exaggerated. And sometimes some kind of data gives indication of that. So some journals do have higher reputation in some areas because people know the people, and we are all humans and we like each other, or we want to be liked. But then you look at the numbers, or look at, whether anyone is actually reading that, at least through the official channels, because things may be distributed guerrilla style by email, right? Everybody is reading your PDF that you have shared by email or on your website, but no one is really crossing the paywall to read it. So yeah, I have done some studies for benchmarking, comparing, so the numbers of downloads and citations and stuff, and it's not like more established journals are doing necessarily better, but that doesn't mean that our reputation will be better. So I think we are not yet. We struggled at the beginning. We have seen increasingly that we start getting submissions from people in more senior positions in academia. And we have to deal with things like supervisors emailing me saying, would you publish this by my student? Or, I told my student that your journal would be good for his undergraduate coursework. Thanks. And there's no doubt there's quality stuff from undergraduate students, and I would not judge it because of that, right? It would have to be judged by the content itself. But often there is a correlation that you need more experience to write produce a better piece of output. At the same time, we have tried to encourage, early career researchers and PhD students, by inviting them to submit to the journal. And at the beginning, because we didn't have that much content, the criteria for selection, especially when we had the blog, was different than it is now. So definitely in the last year and this year, the criteria has become tougher. And I would say now it is really the same, because we are all the same people in the same pool, mostly it are the same pools of peer reviewers. And I'm also in the editorial board of other journals and stuff. And when I review for them, it's not very often, but I try. So the criteria is more or less the same. So I think time is what is needed.
There's a question by Rosario Rogel Salazar on your choice on the publisher. Rosario,
that's a very good question.
On your question.
Yeah.
Rosario.
Yes, that's a very good question, Rosario.
Yes, Rosario. Yeah.
Hola.
Hola.
Hi, hola.
Desde Mexico, and it's a great talk, and I'm really fan of Ernesto Priego. And I want to yes. And as far as I understand, you moved to openly the humanities. And how did you make that decision? It's a difficult decision. How did you make that decision, and what advantages did it represent? And mainly, what path do you suggest to follow the other publishers, for example, in Latin America, who would like to do the same?
I think there is an opportunity for an open library of humanities-like project in Latin America. In a way, it already exists on the different guys, as Claxo or Redialic, which are networks of open access repositories, really, and journals. But so to answer, there's two components to your question. One is the Open Library of Humanities. It is a dream come true. It is the project I would have liked to have co-led, right? So for me, the Open Library of Humanities is look at my face. I think it is doing something absolutely incredible, because it is researcher-led publishing. It is led by academics in the humanities that saw the need for open access in the humanities, knowing what the humanities in general and in specific are about, their challenges and opportunities, their cultures, and made it possible to offer open access without charging authors APCs to publish. So commercial publishers have made open access what more, a key offer of their services, because they've been under pressure from researchers and from the research councils. Like by law now, if they want to be part of the academic infrastructure, they need to offer open access. However, they are not willing to make less money. So they basically inverted the business model. So instead of charging the same amount, equivalent amount of money to the library and the university, they charge it to individual researchers that ideally will have funds from a funder to pay for it. It's not meant to come from your own money that you get paid from your salary, right? Or your pocket money. In the humanities, getting funding that includes, this, or it used to be, very rare. There are other possibilities. There are universities that have agreements with some for-profit publishers, but then the decision of where to publish, if you want to publish open access, is being constrained by the fact that then you will go with a publisher that is not likely to charge you money or that the university will pay the open access fee, right? So the fact that the Open Library of Humanities does not require authors to pay to publish is the key con. The other one is that they offer all the infrastructure. They are completely enlightened individuals, an amazing team of people that really care about what they do. And it's a charity, it's not for profit. Now they are also, Paula is here in the audience. I see she works in the Open Library of Humanities. She's co-editing in the Open Library of Humanities journal a collection in Spanish. So there is a possibility for multilingual, the only challenges are really in terms of human resources, because the editors of journals do not, unless they have a particular deal, they don't get paid extra. Now for Latin America, or say other countries in the so-called global South, I would suggest that in terms of national autonomy, cultural autonomy, there is no reason why they could not replicate or follow the model of the Open Library of Humanities, which is first securing, say, in the case of Mexico, for example, securing funding, convincing, group of people, then convincing CONACYT, then the council to, I know, but that would be the model, right? And then a network of libraries. If not, then if a small group of researchers, why not? If that is not a concern, well, approach the Open Library of Humanities. The thing is that their budget is also limited, so they are also quite selective about how they do go about things. But I think there's lots of possibilities in the future for collaboration in terms of making things happen with DOSH. Because that's the thing, publishing costs a lot of money, and sometimes they could, and that's not even counting the time of the academics that make it possible, who rarely get paid directly to do it, right? Thank you, Rosario.
There's a question by Rainer Dennison about your development from guerrilla to establishment. Rainer, if you want to pose your question, please.
Hi there.
Yeah.
Hi, Rainer, good to see you again.
Hi, yes, and I want to thank you for a great talk. I think this is going to be one that anyone who's starting a journal or thinking about starting a journal will find so helpful. I was really struck by what you were talking about around the shifting in platforms and the moving things around for the content. And I was wondering what that did to your sense of the community that was coming with you. Did they follow you to the new platforms, or did you feel like new sorts of community were moving with you or being created by you as you changed the way the journal was working?
That's a brilliant question. Our original model of WordPress and publishing a post each week, and also having another section that we had where we covered events and like actual blogging, we covered conferences and book launches, and broke the original team, I may say. I dare to say. I mean, also because we were at a moment of our careers that everything was getting defined, like in terms of finishing PhDs. I think most of us finished our PhDs in 2011. So that was exactly like we were either about to finish or getting ready to submit. I mean, it was an amazing. It was like a band, right? It was like the. And I am not in any way, I don't know if you know the story of The Fall, but the only member that remains, it's not like that, luckily, there are a lot of lineups. But yes, basically other members that were core to the editorial team decided it was time to focus their energies in other things with very good reason. But I was just so stubborn about this project that I was like, we need to continue. And Brian Hall from Ubiquity Press approached me, having heard of the journal, and because I was, basically tweeting like mad and blogging like mad about open access and stuff. So I became visible to them. So they already knew who I was, even if I hadn't published in any recognized journal and on the field, right? So that was key. And some of the early contributors, senior academic Michael Hill from the University of Technology in Australia became deputy editor. He helped me a lot in those, he helped us. We worked together very actively, and he had his tenure with us until he retired. And it was wonderful because I also learned a lot from Michael, from a more experienced colleague who had been working on comics for a long time. And he also had that freedom of coming from a background that allowed a bit of more. There is something in common between the current team. I think it's changing gradually. We are welcoming new members, diversifying the team, etc., which is absolutely crucial and needed. But a big challenge for that is the free labor, the volunteer time and effort that it requires. And it's just, for me, I just think it's just not fair to ask people to work more in this circumstance. So it has to be really you something believe in and want to do. It's like going to a choir or something, So yeah. So I think, I don't know if that answers the question, but yes, the dynamic changed significantly. And it means that we cannot be as flexible as we used to be before. It means the outputs are getting longer and longer. They are also getting more formal. We are also seeing, we have had, clashes sometimes. There's been, differences of opinion we are seeing though that everything that happens when you have a more formalized peer review process. We struggle finding peer reviewers often because everybody is outstretched. And so I think the current system that relies on volunteer labor is really unsustainable. I don't have a solution for it. At least we have found, the Open Library of Humanities has found a temporary solution for the problem of the financial sustainability of the publishing work, of the infrastructure, of the, it's like making the output and putting it out there and ensuring that that stays there. But the intellectual labor and the review labor, the copy editing labor and all of that, it's still being done outside the official channels, let's say, of reward.
I'm just really, really pleased to hear that. And I was really also very interested to hear that manga was always so popular for you. I wonder if, and I'm happy to help if I can be of help.
Yes. Yeah. An invitation to everyone here that the journal is always, if anything, we don't receive enough expressions of interest from colleagues. So it is not my project. I'm not the boss. I'm not, and our virtual doors are open to any expressions of interest. Recently, colleagues from, Kai from HCI reached out as well, and we're working on a special collection. Colleagues from Bournemouth, so it is about reaching out and finding ways to collaborate in a way that also does not kill us, right? In a way that we have, like this year, we closed submissions. We had never done that all of January because we were all exhausted, and there was also some work that had to be done in the journal, but infrastructurally speaking. But I think it is very important to be sensible these days and not expect colleagues to work as normal, especially if they are doing it just out of the goodness of their hearts. Thank you, Reina. I look forward to keep chatting, and hopefully we can make something happen. Yeah.
Eme Mendoza Sanchez has a question about the future of comic scholarship. Eme, if you are there, please.
Okay. Hello. Good
There you
afternoon,
are.
everyone. And nice to meet you, everyone here. And yes, Ernesto, was really pleased about your intervention. I just have this small question about, the borders or the links between one genre or another. In that sense, the comics as an area of knowledge and also of research. But do you think comic scholarship can lead to take more seriously, always with the quotation marks, and other areas of culture or knowledge as video games or other graphic narrative productions in the world of the academics? And of course, regarding the open humanities, I think it's important, maybe.
I think so, yeah. I mean, the answer is yes. I mean, in a way, it's already happened. I think it is, in the MLA, for example, the Modern Language Association, the comics area is very big and well established, well, relatively big, and well established with a long history. It depends across countries and institutional cultures, but I think comic studies are increasingly recognized as any other kind of study. But it has definitely helped that there's been interest from established. I don't know. It's like, I think there's like a coming of age. You see, like suddenly you are like, okay, this happened because someone my age got to this position. So now we are seeing different television and stuff because different people are making television. So I do think that now, different people are making academia as well. Technology has played a role, but it is fantastic that colleagues in history, in archaeology, in computer science are studying comics. So therefore, comic studies, I think there is a definition, there's a constrained view of comic studies as a subset of cultural studies, literary studies. It is within literature and the humanities, but there is lots of possibilities, and there are lots of literature from other areas. Something that I do, and I invite people to do, even if you hate Google, is to subscribe to some searches on Google Alerts and just write, in Google Scholar Alerts, comics or comics and COVID, comics and cancer, comics and political science, comics, and then you will get spammed with an amazing amount of scholarship from all over the place that is looking at comics, but if you are in comic studies proper, like doing studies about Art Spiegelman Mouse and Testimony or whatever, may not know about, because they are working about comics, on comics, with comics, creating comics from a completely different perspective. So I think that has helped. It has helped when comics are part of a discipline which is already stronger. So for me, it was a realization, joining the Center for Human Computer Interaction, that CHI, that's the main conference organized by the Association of Computer Machinery, had such a strong, so many people working on comics or related to comic storyboarding, sketching, and things, areas that are quite similar where, and we can contribute to. So I'm sure there's other areas like that as well.
Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you for your question.
I have also a question now that you are here. So about the comics themselves, or the comic culture. So the term comic has some nostalgic touch to me. So but what would you say is the state of this comic culture? I don't know. It's an extremely wide field. I mean, there are graphic novels, so you also cover the field of graphic novels. Manga is big. Yeah. Is there a prediction about the field where this develops, or is it falling into parts, or just a general idea about this field?
Yes, I mean, I think, that's an excellent question, Franz, and I think that in a way, in the very title of the journal, we signed a little bit our death sentence in that. Because yes, we are trying to define that for us in terms of scope, and that we have noticed basically two main branches, regardless on what the object of study is, whether it is manga or graphic novels or comics or webtoons or webcomics or digital comics, or that some look at the comic as a comic, and others use the comic to say things about something else. And we are interested in the former. I think is we have an idea. We used to joke around, other colleagues, Damon Hare, the Hattie Kennedy, Peter Willikins, that comics everywhere. We used to say that to mean that comics for us, even though we come from very strong, cultures of material culture, the comics as material culture, and print and all the surrounding objects, trading cards and posters and toys and stuff, that comics go beyond matter, that are a way of thinking, a way of visualizing, a way of telling, of transmitting information. And as such, we're seeing comics as the some call it language, others call it system, others call it medium, others call it art form, but I don't think it has necessarily to be art. So comics as that. So that's why naturally we get frustrated sometimes as editors, like our personal preferences also come in, and we're like, okay, we need to diversify. In our latest editorial, we were saying, we get a lot on superheroes, and we would like to see more research which is not on superheroes, even if it's about Muslim superheroes, or even if it's diverse within the superhero niche. Me myself, who has been reading comics since I was 5, there's an excess of scholarship on superheroes, and maybe they deserve it, but there's a reason why we're not called Journal of Superhero Scholarship, right? So there's, especially in the English-speaking world, we continue to be so monolingual. It's so frustrating for a bilingual person, that we, apart from manga, and unless it's Tantan or something Asterix, there is very little scholarship in English about, with exceptions, right? There are exceptions, but there could be way more. Syllabi are full of the same books that are now canon because of availability, because of popularity, because of them being transmedia phenomena. But there is an excess of very good, interesting comics and comics-like phenomena that can be studied from many approaches. So we wouldn't be, I think I'm really interested, for example, in the relationship between comics and street art, or comics and ethnography, or all of this stuff. I would like to see more of. I don't know if that answered your question, Franz, but
absolutely. Yeah. There's a question connected to this also by Georges Poulados in the chat about the relationship to public history, where comics are also very strong, I think, and have an important impact. So, George, if you want to pose your question.
Yes, good evening. Congratulations on the speech. I'm sorry, my camera, if I open my camera, we will have problem with the network. Very good speech. To be sincere, I'm studying public history. I'm doing an MA. But what I'm really interested in is the way you approach comics. I really enjoyed your approach. I even just visited your website. Congratulations. You've been doing a very good job from what I can see.
Thank you.
My interest, however, is how do comics depict what we call today public history? How do people understand history in this sense? And if you see this is flourishing or if it's going to diminish, what is your opinion? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your kind comments. I shared on the chat. It's no longer that recent. 2013 comic review of a monograph on. Or I can't remember now if it's a collected edition, but it's on graphic history. So graphic history recently being used as a term to talk about history represented in graphic storytelling or visual storytelling form, i.e. in comics. And I think, we need to do more research on this. I mean, I'm not a historian, and but I would say that it is a big field, right? So there's lots of literature on comics and history, comics in history, and the relatively recent popularity of documentary comics. Colleagues have I can think of at least a couple of very good monographs that were published in the last 5 years or or so about, documentary or non-fiction comics. There's also, a lot of opportunities for studying this in a more, mixed methods approach rather than just, surveying or the literature, the comics that are about history or that are about historical events, to actually investigate the reception. This is something that Roger Sabin and Mel Gibson and so many other respected comic scholars have been talking, Ian, have been talking about for a long time about, we need more studies on comic book readerships, and different countries have very strong traditions, in terms of history, and we can say that the recent, deconstruction, the colonial reading of canonical comics texts such as, Tantan, is an aspect of reading history in a way, retrospectively against the grain. It is comparable to critiques of Heart of Darkness. So, there's lots of traditions that can be investigated in that way. The recent popularity of graphic novels like, Joe Sacco's Palestine, or help me here, Satrapi's, what's the name? Marjan Satrapi's the graphic novel about Iran, Stitches. I mean, so many graphic novels that Persepolis, thank you very much. All these graphic novels are Mouse, obviously, all that opened a field of possibilities for research. That is not to say that fiction comics, even superhero comics, do not offer a lot of possibilities for studying from history, superhero comics in the US. Anyway, it's a whole field, right? There's a lot of literature about that. There's no way a single journal could cover all that. Yeah, I know it's late. Thank you very much for everyone who has been showing up and saying comments in the chat. Thank you.
Yeah, we are slowly reaching the end of this seminar. There's a comment by Alex Fitch, an announcement. So he's working on the relationship of architecture and comics. So, great topic. Alex, if you want to elaborate briefly on this before we close, and maybe have space also for one last question. Alex.
Yeah, hi. I mean, I didn't want to monopolize the conversation. It's just that when the topic came up of, why aren't people looking at connections between comics and history and comics and street art, just to say that, I'm investigating that in my PhD, the way that perhaps comics might be a language that could help people understand the use of architecture by its designers and its inhabitants. I think that sequential art is very useful for showing, for example, the relationship of the human body to a building, the way that a building might be used by people in different weather conditions, unexpected uses, all those sorts of things, in a way I think that's easier to study than other media, than if we compare it to photography on architecture, film on architecture, and things like that.
Absolutely. And, a photo that I did not include in my very lengthy deck of slides was a photo of the original team of the Comics Grid in Copenhagen with Jimenez Lai. So he's got a graphic novel called Citizens of No Place, which is about comics and architecture. This has been also in our horizon. I congratulate you for it's a lovely, very interesting topic, and there is indeed already some very valuable work on that. So just to clarify, I was not saying there's no work on all these areas. What I was trying to say is that when that happens, it has helped comic studies gain the respectability that perhaps they didn't have before. There's a lot of stuff, for example, that you cannot see behind me, but comics on studies on comics and religion and sacred texts and things like that, and that also means that scholars in theology and religious studies are reading comics from that perspective, and vice versa. So all of that is fantastic. Thank you, Alex. It's good to see you as well. Thank you.
It's the last reading suggestion by Juliet Fall and about the Italian fumetti, which is also a nice label for comics, which you are probably all familiar with. Juliet, if you want to say something about.
Yeah, no, it's just I mean, to get us away from the superheroes, which to me is also a reflection of, you know, the usual Anglo bias in publishing. I think, I mean, if, you know, many of the audience here is in Italy. I mean, Italy's got an extraordinary national tradition of comics, be it, you know, politically engaged ones like in the Becco Giallo publishing house, or all the ones that you buy for €3 in the train station. So yeah, I think there's to me it would be an opportunity to really explore a whole diversity of languages, and, you know, Ernesto is obviously deeply rooted in Latin America and Central America traditions, which is also something we should really celebrate.
Yeah, and like what's fantastic, thank you, Juliet, in comics, like, you know, the connections between Italian comics and French comics and Latin American comics were key, right? So obviously the work of Hugo Pratt and Alberto Brescia, and, you know, so the whole Italian connection with Latin America was fantastic, and now that has lots of repercussions. So it's just like, you know, where are the submissions about classics such as Corto Maltese or something? And even if it's now, I think we missed the boat for more straightforward readings, but more, you know, critiques of how he represented the other or whatever, things like that. You know, and the same goes for Alberto Brescia, El Eternauta, which is a graphic novel, a classic graphic novel that has been recently belatedly published in translation in English. It's available in many languages, but it's a great book to revisit. It's about dictatorships, but it makes interesting reading in pandemic times as well. I will try the name here, but that's another topic.
I think that's a wonderful ending for a seminar by the Venice Center for Digital and Public Humanities, to end on a note on Hugo Pratt and Corto Maltese, so Venetian author and comic story rooted in Venice. So thank you very much, everyone, for a wonderful discussion, a long discussion with, and first and foremost to Ernesto for this excellent talk and to giving us insight in so many aspects of popular culture and scholarship on popular culture. So thank you very much, Ernesto. We will have our next seminar in 2 weeks, Wednesday, 17th February, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Central European Winter Time. Marta Severo from Université Paris-Nanterre on the theoretical and methodological challenges of cultural heritage participation and platform, which is probably interesting to many or most of us here. So please come back in 2 weeks. Everyone enjoy the evening, make the best of the possibilities under the lockdown, and yeah, thank you very much.
It's a shame we cannot go and have a glass of wine.
Usually we would now have an aperitivo on the yeah.
But it's been so nice. Thank you, everyone, for your patience and tolerance.
Thank you.